We have some breaking news coming out here. The Las Vegas Raiders are looking to trade cornerback Jack Jones, and if they're unable to trade him, he will be released tomorrow, and we're going to talk about what this means for the Raiders. Because as we go forward, the Raiders might actually draft a cornerback at this point with the 6th overall pick. And if they don't draft the cornerback, they might have to still address this position as we kind of go forward. But we're going to talk about what this means for the Raiders. Let's get right into this. So Vincent Monsignor is the one that put it out there. He said the Raiders are working to trade cornerback Jack Jones, but if they can't work out a trade, Jones will be released on Monday. To me, this report right here comes directly from the Las Vegas Raiders front office. Right, the front office has these reporters that they work with. Vincent Monsignor is one of the reporters that, historically speaking, has been the guy for the Raiders. Right, anytime the Raiders front office has needed something to kind of get put out there, they always contact Vincent Monsignor. To me, what this reads is that the Raiders are actually going to release Jack Jones, right? And to say that they're working on a trade, to me, is just kind of telling all the other teams that, hey, you guys have 24 hours if you're interested in Jack Jones. You got 24 hours if you're interested in him, reach out to us, and we'll basically give you him for a 7th round pick. Now, some people are going to say, hey, if you put the report out that, you're going to release him, why would anyone want to trade for him, right? Well, the thing is he's not going to just get released, right? He would get waived, and then you got to go through the waiver process. So let's say there's a team that might be at the bottom, like the Pittsburgh Steelers, or a team like the Kansas City Chiefs. And let's say they're at the bottom of that waiver pool. They might say, hey, we want Jack Jones. This guy's talented as hell. We want this guy. We'll give you a 7th round pick. Because let's be honest, Jack Jones is one of the most talented corners in the NFL. And I won't say he's one of the best, because he really didn't prove that this past season, but he is one of the most talented corners. I truly think if Jack Jones got together with an elite defensive coordinator that produces elite corners, a coordinator like what the Washington Commanders have at their head coach position, right? Dan Quinn, he made Trayvon Diggs one of the elite corners. He made Deron Bland one of the elite corners. And now they have the 2nd round rookie that the Washington Commanders drafted this past season out of Michigan. I forget his name. I think it's Mike something. He's, I think he had like 6-7 interceptions this past year. So, Jack Jones, if he gets paired up with a good defensive coordinator, he could be one of the best corners. And the thing with Jack Jones is this guy does not have the work ethic. And that's the other side of this. And I think sometimes he's going to get overlooked a little bit. Jack Jones, from what I've heard, and I just spoke about this past Friday. If you guys watched that video, I talked about it 2 separate times. Go watch that video. I'll pin it down in the comments below, the exact segment, right? So you can just click the link. It'll take you directly to where that segment is. But I talked about it, how I had heard from a good friend of mine that Jack Jones has a really, really bad work ethic. His character, the character's one thing, but the work ethic is a different thing, right? The work ethic is terrible. He doesn't show up on time. He's always late to the team meetings. He doesn't put the effort in, right? Coaches will say, hey, we have a workout plan with the defensive backs. He doesn't show up, right? Hey, we have this plan. He doesn't show up, right? And, we heard Maxx Crosby talking about how Jackson Powers-Johnson's in the building at 6 o'clock every day. Jack Jones is not. He shows up at 10 o'clock. Whenever the time is that you should show up in the building, that's when he shows up. And sometimes he's even late to that, right? And this is something I heard from someone else. And I spoke about that report on Friday, right? Like what I had heard specifically. And to hear that Jack Jones was being released literally 2 or 3 days later is kind of crazy, because I didn't think this would happen so soon. I would think that, hey, the Raiders start, the first day on April 8th. They're going to let this guy come in and potentially prove himself. Maybe they sit down and have that conversation with him, because the talent level is with Jack Jones is there, right? And, I say work ethic is different than character. If you guys remember when he was with the Patriots, there were some character things that had kind of happened, right? I think he had like an arrest at an airport. And I think he had one other situation that had kind of happened. But none of that ever came over and translated to the Raiders, right? Like he never got in trouble while he was with the Raiders. But the work ethic is the one thing that is, especially us fans, we don't know who puts the effort in. We don't know who works out. And, that's why I literally spoke about that on Friday, right? We're talking about why it's important for that first day, right? The Raiders get into the building on April 8th. Coaches, players can kind of start coming in. It's important for the coaches to know what's important and what's not. And something tells me that Patrick Graham has already set the tone that, hey, this guy's work ethic is terrible and I don't want this guy around, right? Because that's the only thing that makes sense. Pete Carroll, John Spytek, they don't know Jack Jones at all. The only guy that knows Jack Jones would be at that point Patrick Graham, right? So if the Raiders are planning to release Jack Jones, hopefully they trade him, get a 7th round pick out of it. I think some team might budge and say, hey, we want this guy, as opposed to going through the waiver process. If the Raiders do release him, I understand why. It's unfortunate because he's so talented. But, at the end of the day, you have to build the way you want to build, right? We brought in Eric Stokes. He's like 6'1.5", 6'2". He's long, he's tall, he's lengthy. That's the Pete Carroll corner, right? That's the type of cornerback that Pete Carroll wants. Will Johnson would fit that scheme and system perfectly. Texas has a cornerback as well, Jahari Brown. He looks really, really good on tape as well. He's another guy I would think the Raiders would at least be interested in with the 6th overall pick. But to me, when I think about the draft and kind of how it could shape up as we go forward, a lot of people have talked about the Raiders potentially bringing in a tackle. People have talked about potentially bringing in a defensive end and replacing Malcolm Koonce. If there's one thing with this class that I think is different than any class we've had in the last 10 years, it's that there's probably like 12 defensive ends in this class that are going to be really, really good football players. And, I think for the Raiders, if you want a really, really good defensive end, you can get one in the 2nd round, maybe even in the 3rd round, right? And I think as we just kind of go forward, the Raiders just have to build the way they want to build. If they want to build a winning culture where guys are buying in, guys are putting that work ethic in, you have to move off of guys like Jack Jones, right? And again, I always say this. You and I, we can watch tape and we can say, damn, Jack Jones is talented, right? He's fluid as hell. He's quick as hell. He's explosive. He's very sticky in coverage. Yeah, he falls for, I shouldn't even say he falls for double moves, right? Those are things that coaches are telling you guys, take those chances, right? Yes, Jack Jones gets caught in those double moves and he gives up those touchdowns, but he also gets interceptions. And I think that's something Patrick Graham coaches him, right? But with that being stated, one of the things we don't know is, even though the tape's impressive, we don't know the work ethic and we don't know that side of things, right? And obviously with Jack Jones, it's just not there. Now, I do hope they're able to trade him. If they can't, it is what it is. Release him, move forward. Now, the Raiders are going to have to figure that cornerback position out. So you got Eric Stokes, who you brought in. I would think Eric Stokes ends up starting, but, if Eric Stokes was a good corner, Packers would have kept him around, right? And based off of what I've heard from the fans, he was not a good corner. Now, I did watch his tape. It is kind of hard to watch his tape because he's went from 2 different schemes over the past couple of seasons. And I think scheme is definitely a big part of being able to have success or not. He did have a really, really good rookie year, and I would hope that, Pete Carroll and Patrick Graham's, the new scheme we run allows him to have that success the way he did in his rookie year. But we'll see, right? And we do have guys like Cameron Richardson. We have Jacorian Bennett. Jacorian Bennett looked good as well for the Raiders this past season. We have a couple other guys as well, but I do think the Raiders have to add another corner, right? They have to figure that position out. But the thing with the corner is, you can always get one in the 3rd or 4th round, and, you just never know if a guy's going to end up being good. I think corner, again, is one of those positions where, you can get a guy late and you can mold them into the corner you want. And they can be elite corners in the NFL, right? Jack Jones was not a 1st-round pick, and he was pretty solid, right? Minus the work ethic. You can look at guys like Stanford Routt, although I think Stanford Routt might have been a pretty high draft pick. I don't remember exactly on that one. But then, even more recently, right, we see guys like Deron Bland, who's like a 5th-round pick. We see guys like Mike Salvadaro, I'm butchering his name, from Michigan, goes to the Commanders. He's pretty solid. The Chiefs are drafting the elitist corners in the NFL at the end of the 1st round for multiple years, right? You can get corners that fit schemes and systems and be good. And I use Stanford Routt as an example because, there's a time when the Raiders had Nnamdi Asomugha, who was elite with the Raiders scheme and system, right? It was a press man coverage scheme and system at that time. We're going to play man coverage 98% of the time. And Nnamdi was legit, but then he left and he wasn't as good in that, for that next team, right? He went to the Eagles, wasn't as good. And then Stanford Routt steps in the next year and he ends up being one of the best statistically, right? And, corner to me is a position where you can find a guy late in the draft, right? Now, of course, I still will say this. The top 2 or 3 corners in the NFL will always be top 5 picks, right? Or at least top 10 picks, right? Jalen Ramsey's an example. Derek Stingley is another example, right? These are guys that were picked high. And they end up being, to me right now, Derek Stingley's the best corner. Sauce Gardner's right there as well. And I know he's had some issues, but he's pretty solid as well. I'd say he's a top 5 corner no matter how you look at it. Jalen Ramsey's always been a top 10 corner over the course of his career. If there's that type of cornerback that's actually available in any given draft, you draft that guy, right? Now, it is not guaranteed to draft that type of cornerback either, though, right? The Raiders haven't had their most success taking corners in the 1st round. But I do think if you're picking in the top 6 and you have a chance at the first corner in a class, generally speaking, those guys work out pretty well, right? There's one other report that I just want to kind of get into really quickly. Adam Schefter put it out there that Michigan defensive tackle Mason Graham is visiting the Cleveland Browns on Monday, and then he'll be visiting the Raiders coming up on Tuesday. So as we're talking about the Raiders potentially getting cornerback to replace Jack Jones, I think it's important to recognize that the Raiders, you could get that corner in the 2nd, 3rd, or 4th round. You might even have guys on the roster that you trust, but never overlook how important specific positions are, right? In my opinion, defensive ends, defensive tackles, offensive tackles, quarterbacks, receivers, those 5 positions are the positions you want to draft in the 1st round, especially if you're picking in the top 10, right? Because when you draft, let's say, a running back in the top 10, no offense to Ashton Gent, he's a great player, but when you draft a safety in the top 10, right, generally those positions don't have the type of impact that a D tackle, a DN, an offensive tackle, a quarterback, a wide receiver has, right? Because those other positions are sometimes dependent on the scheme and system. They're dependent on other players. And a wide receiver is kind of dependent on quarterbacks as well. But, we've seen Justin Jefferson, for example, have a lot of success, even if his quarterback may, not be the quarterback that they kind of expected, or it kind of changes out. We saw Devontae Adams have success with Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell. Guys kind of, going in and out with Jimmy G, right? Sometimes elite wide receivers are hard to get, right? And I think if you can find an elite wide receiver, you can change an offense. But the Raiders are bringing in Mason Graham, and I think it's interesting because I'm not the type of guy that's high on Mason Graham, and I'll continue to say this. This is one opinion that I will not change, right? Now, if the Raiders were to draft Mason Graham at pick 6, I'm not going to lie to you guys, man. I would be disappointed with that pick. I think it'd be a bad pick. If you're taking a defensive tackle, you're not taking him because he's a run defender, right? You're taking a defensive tackle with the 6th overall pick because he's an elite pass rusher, right? He's disruptive to getting to the quarterback, right? So if you're going to pick a defensive end or a defensive tackle in the top 10, you don't want Cleveland Farrell. You want Jalen Carter, right? You want guys that can get after the quarterback. And one of the things with Mason Graham is he's not an elite pass rusher, right? He's just not. You can put the tape on. He's not an elite pass rusher. Now, he's okay, right? He's, somewhere in the middle of the pack, right? If you looked at all the defensive tackles in the NFL, you take the 64 starting defensive tackle, probably fits right there around like the 40-ish range, right? But the thing is, with the 6th overall pick, that's not what you want. You want a guy that's an elite pass rusher. And in this class, unfortunately, there's no elite pass rushing defensive tackle. And for people to say Mason Graham is a top 5, top 3, top 2 player in this class is ridiculous to me. He's not that, right? Travis Hunter is so much better at his position than what Mason Graham is. Abdul Carter is so much better at his position than what Mason Graham is. To me, Mason Graham is not the guy I would want for the Raiders. But I will say this, Mason Graham is super, super strong, and you can see that on tape right away. He plays really low, and he's able to leverage himself against guys really well. He does not get moved at all. Honestly, the anchor that Mason Graham has in the run game, his ability to 2-gap guys and control gaps in the run game specifically, I would say that part of his game is definitely elite. So if you're going to tell me you want Mason Graham because he's an elite run defender, I'd be okay with that, right? Now at 6, I don't love it, but I would be okay with that if you admit that he is not an elite pass rusher, right? In my opinion, I don't really have a consensus number 1 defensive tackle in this class. And I'm not alone in that, right? Brett Coleman put this out there yesterday, and some people were like, how does this make sense? But I agree so much with Brett here. He said he's wrapping up his interior defensive line rankings tonight. He said, won't spoil the whole thing, but Mason Graham ended up as defensive tackle 4 for me. Brett Coleman is a very, very smart guy, right? This is not he's not stupid. He's a very, very smart guy. He watches tape. He also has a lot of connections to NFL general managers and scouts, and I think some of his opinions do come from those guys directly. Brett Coleman was very, very early on the Shadur Sanders is not a first-round pick. Don't be surprised if he doesn't go in the top 10. This was back in like November of last year, and people are like, man, this guy's an idiot. But he was right? And when he put that out there, he was 100% right. Shador is not a first-round pick. He's probably not going to go in the top 10, and I think more and more people are realizing that today. But we're in April. This guy was saying this back in November, which means he has to have some sort of insight. And I think he even has some insight on Mason Graham. I don't think he's just putting him at D tackle 4 because of the tape. Although I don't really think there's a consensus #1 defensive tackle in this class. I do think Mason Graham has a ton of potential in the run game, but again, if I'm drafting a D tackle, I'm drafting a guy because of their pass rush. And obviously the Raiders are bringing this guy in, which means they're at least interested in potentially drafting him with the 6th overall pick. Now, I would also say this, there's also a chance the Raiders want to redo the measurement of the arms. I think it became a huge scandal, right? Or not scandal, but it's become a huge storyline if you're in the scouting world. I know some people don't follow it, but the measurement of arms has been way off, right? Almost an inch for certain guys. From the NFL draft combine to the actual pro days to the actual the All-Star games that we had, right? The Senior Bowl, the Shrine. They're saying that the Senior and Shrine had much realistic measurables, and the combine measurables were wrong. Right? The guy was measuring it incorrectly. I guess there was an issue with where they're starting the measurement from, and I guess that's the scout that ran that arm measuring. Apparently he was wrong, but he did it for everybody. So like they're saying everybody's arm measurements are wrong. So maybe the Raiders want to get the updated numbers of Mason Graham, right? Because the guy's arms just are really, really, really short. And we saw Jazon Newton fall last year to the 2nd round because of that. Newton had elite tape. Newton's tape was better than Mason Graham's tape. There's no comparison about that. And he ended up falling because people were saying his arms are just too short. But the thing is Newton actually had a really good rookie year as well. So sometimes tape matters more than arm length, right? But in my opinion, with Mason Graham, I'm just not impressed with this tape, specifically the pass rush. I think his pass rush win rate is like 5%, and that's in college. Byron Murphy, for example, his rookie year had a win rate of like 12% in the NFL, right? So just think about the difference. 5% in college, 12% in the NFL. I think Byron Murphy in college, and I think it was like 19%. It was a pretty good number, right? Jalen Carter was like 23% in college. 5% is a very, very, very low win rate percentage. Pass rush win rate percentage, right? So again, to me, not an elite pass rusher. Would I be disappointed with the pick? I would be. But I do understand if the Raiders went with Mason Graham, it's probably because he's like the opposite of what we have at the D tackle position right now. Adam Butler's an elite pass rusher, not that good when it comes to run defense. Christian Wilkins, although he's a pretty damn good run defender, if we could use Wilkins as a true pass rusher, I think his most upside would be in pass rushing. His most impact would be as a pass rusher. So Mason Graham, you can put all 3 of those guys on the field together. Mason Graham could be that guy that you put right there in the middle, and he just blows gaps up, right? And he does have that on tape. He does flash that. So we'll see what ends up happening, man. Either way, the Raiders are moving off of Jack Jones. They'll probably release him tomorrow, and then we'll see what they do in the draft, right? The Jack Jones things really shapes things up. It really puts the Raiders back in the cornerback market, in my opinion. So we'll see what ends up happening. Let me know what you guys think, man. Thumbs up, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time with another video.